All right. Welcome, TJ, to the Self-Employment Success Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on.
Of course, I'm excited for today's conversation. One, because I like you and I think your business is fascinating. And two, because your business is a lot like mine. So I think it'll be a really fun conversation. But go ahead and tell the listeners who you are, what your business is, and what you do and who you serve.
Yeah, absolutely. I launched my firm, Modern Wealth Builders, back in 2018. So I serve millennial couples, specifically when one person has some type of equity compensation. So that's usually the way that people come to me is maybe they're working for a private company and they have stock options and they're anticipating going public and they're trying to figure out the tax planning behind it and ultimately what they want to do with that money. So that's usually the initial kind of pain point that brings people in. But then beyond that, it really transitions into a financial planning and wealth management relationship. So like ultimately figuring out like what do you want to use your resources for, like actually living your life, right? Because that's the point of actually using your money. My story was I've always been interested in personal finance and investing. In college, I studied economics and actuarial science. So I was always into kind of like the math side of things, but I didn't really know a lot about the personal finance and financial planning. And after college, or like my senior year of college, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I got introduced to the idea of personal, financial planning. And I ended up working for a practice through Ameriprise, working for a really great advisor who had been there for a long time. And she kind of showed me the ropes. I got all my licenses and CFP designation, those kind of things. But I, was always following Michael Kitces. If you're not familiar, Michael Kitces is kind of like our, industry leader for financial planning and really discovered the independent side of things. And so I kind of knew pretty early out of college that what I wanted to do was build my own independent financial planning practice, serving, my generation, just because most of the industry was geared towards serving, retirees with, $1 million or more of investable assets. And I really wanted to figure out a way how I could serve, people who aren't there quite yet, but really are making like those big decisions early on. So that you could have that like impact on them over the course of their life. And so it was really a pretty quick, but also long journey in some ways for me is, I was really just putting the pieces together. I graduated college in 2015. And pretty much as soon as I had my CFP designation, 3 years in, got my Series 7, Series 66 insurance license, went down the path of discovering XY Planning Network, which again, if you're not familiar, it's just a network of advisors. Michael Kitces is also a co-founder of that, which kind of empowers individuals to create their own practice and have the technology, to serve Gen X and Gen Y. So basically, moved back to Massachusetts in 2018. I was working in the Northern Virginia area again for that Ameriprise practice. I did work for kind of an individual practice for a little bit with an advisor who was independent, serving retirees, but we really just didn't mesh too well. And I did decide to kind of break off from him and left in kind of an abrupt manner. So it was kind of a scary transition there. But yeah, launched from scratch with no clients and really just grinded, through, social media and just basically friends kind of to start of building Modern Wealth Builders and structuring the practice the way I wanted to. And here we are, going on 6 years later and still doing it, still learning quite a bit. That's a little bit about my story, I guess, of how I got to where I am today.
Yeah. So your story is so very similar to mine of, graduated, started working in kind of a big corporate, traditional financial advisory firm, serving lots of retirees and things like that. And then as I got my CFP, discovered Michael Kitces, discovered XY Planning Network, discovered, hey, there's a world where we can do this differently and serve the people that I actually care about serving, which similar to you is people like myself on the younger side, where so much of life is ahead of you. And, can we get it right on the front end rather than come to us at 55, 60, when most people come to a financial advisor and are just making up for lost time.
Exactly.
And so, but what I'm, to paint a picture for the listeners, and you can definitely speak to this because it's your story, but the normal path into the financial advisory, personal finance space is going into one of the huge firms like an Ameriprise, like the firm that I used to work for, where they take hundreds, if not thousands of young people. And they're good firms. They've got good teams. But it's a lot of, being paid off of the transactions or the size balance of accounts. It's a lot of, quantity, not necessarily always over quality, but there's just a lot of quantity. And then there's the independent space, which is much more niche focused. There's not as many of us in the world of personal finance. I think it's probably the 80-20 rule. 80% of people are at the big corporate firms, 20% are independent. And in our field, it's really hard to make a jump. It's really hard because so much of it is based off of commissions or revenue or amount of clients, so that if you make a transition and you go from a book of business to no book of business where you're starting from scratch, that's a scary transition. So for you were at Ameriprise for a few years, getting licensed, getting certified, getting experience. And then it came to the point where you were thinking about the independent space. What was it for you that made you say, yes, this is what I want to do? Like, this is, I want to take this big leap to go from a lot of income to very little income. What were some of the pain points for you that made you want to make this transition? And then what about the transition was like, this feels like the right fit? Because it's not the best fit for everybody. And it is a huge life transition. It's a lot of work to be both a financial planner and a business owner. So tell us that piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first I'll start off by saying I wasn't making a lot of money. So I was like fresh out of college. And so I was a paraplanner really. And I will give credit to the, advisor that I learned under. She really did, prioritize financial planning, even though, there was a lot of poor incentives built into, I would say, that like corporate type structure. And I was doing all of kind of that admin and paraplanning and trading work behind the scenes. And so I did get the opportunity to dive into the products and, as far as like annuities and all these insurance products and kind of the commission structures attached to them, and just really understanding, how much people were paying in fees. And I'm not against people paying fees for advice, but there definitely is like the opportunity to make a ton of money in a very short time frame. And that can kind of create some poor incentives, in my opinion. And so, the reason why I want to take the leap was that I just thought that I could do it better for less money. So really what I thought was like, hey, I can create this same type experience, if not better and more efficient for a fraction of the cost, make a good living doing it for myself, and also provide a better value to the client. So it really wasn't much of a leap of faith for me, in the sense that I wasn't walking away from anything because I didn't necessarily have like dependents or was making a large, income. So in that sense, I was lucky to not have things like college debt. And so I did have a little bit of savings. So really the downside risk for me was only the fact that if I failed, I'd have to go back to work for another corporation or something like that. But I just knew that the technology was there, and I did feel confident in kind of my technical, knowledge and the value that I could provide to clients. And, just given how much things have changed, over the last kind of, I'd say 2 decades, really, as far as like the access to technology for independent advisors and the access to investment custodians where we can actually, manage clients' money, that I was pretty confident, that again, I could charge a fair price for a lot of value there. It was really just about giving myself the runway where I was like, hey, I need to be able to find this amount of clients in this time frame. And then just being honest with myself as far as like, hey, if this doesn't work over this time frame, then I need to make adjustments. I mean, I've always been a very independent person. I had a kind of pretty independent upbringing, and I knew that I wanted to be entrepreneurial in some way. And so this was just kind of a natural stepping point for me in the ability to, create the practice that basically I would want for myself. I mean, how I do things is kind of like if I, was working with a financial planner, how I'd want things structured. And so it's pretty simple in that regard.
Totally. Something you said is, I realized I could provide a lot of value for the fraction of the cost and still pay myself a great living. And I remember when I similarly was like seeing all the fees that people were paying, and then what I was getting paid off that, and then looking at kind of the value that I was allowed to provide versus what I wasn't, I realized the same thing. I was like, I can charge less money, pay myself more, and provide more value to the client. Why wouldn't I do that?
Seems like a win-win to me.
Totally. So when you talk about like, I wanted to structure it in a way that, I would want it to be structured if I was looking for a financial advisor, what is that structure?
Yeah,
Like
no, great
what is it that
question.
you're doing that's different or that's structured for specifically your ideal clients?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing is again working with Gen X, Gen Y. They're not going to have that level of investable assets, which may be able to compensate you at a level. Again with the retirees, if they're charging on assets, you have $1 million of assets, you may be paying $10,000 a year. But if you don't have $1 million of assets, then you're not going to be able to pay that level of fee. But you may be able to afford a monthly subscription for a few $100s for financial planning, and it's still worth it to you based on the value you provide. And so basically, I wanted to focus on net worth. So really understanding someone's complete financial picture. I think a lot of times, again, especially in the product space, we're trying to fit a product to whatever situation it is. And really, I do enjoy kind of the idea of resource management, just thinking about like, how are we using your resources efficiently? So I
Mm,
love to look at a client's net worth and think about not just the investment side of the piece, but also looking at debt, looking at checking and savings, thinking about tax planning. Like, where are the areas that we can add value to your total net worth, which is just assets minus liabilities. And so there's so many areas to add value that are outside of investments. And if we decouple kind of how we get paid from maybe just the product itself, then if we focus on net worth, I mean, and again, you could say like I'm incentivized to grow someone's net worth, and that's not always like the best use. Sometimes growing net worth isn't what you want to do because you want to actually spend your money. But still, when it comes to working with a younger person who isn't more that accumulation phase, focusing on the complete picture just made more sense to me. And if I was working with a financial planner, financial advisor, I would want them to think about everything, not just the investment component.
totally. I completely agree with that. And as you know, I also do a net worth component because to me, that's actually like the clearest picture of your health. If you've got, a $400,000 IRA, but a $600,000 personal loan, like small business loan, your net worth is negative. So it kind of looks pretty on paper when you have a big account that you're charging on, but you could be actually very unhealthy.
Right.
And so being able to take into account, especially for younger investors, Gen X, Gen Y, even some Gen Z that are getting older, a lot of them have student loans, car payments, are trying to buy a house, trying to navigate the mortgage world. All of that are things that are not necessarily part of your investments, but are a very clear part of your whole financial picture. They're a huge planning area that we need to be talking about. So you charge a kind of subscription, you said, on net worth. What does that look like as far
Yeah.
as is it monthly? Is there minimums? Are there caps? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so it's changed a lot over the years. Like I started out doing like a monthly subscription of like literally like $100 a month, and we've kind of worked up over the years. And so today, as it stands, it starts at 1,500 per quarter or 6,000 per year, and then up to 12,000 per year. And then I just do that based on 0.5% of net worth, but it still caps out at 12,000. So that's where it stands at today. So it's a pretty straightforward structure. It's quarter to quarter, and it's really on me to kind of just add value.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So anywhere from 500 on the low end to $1,000 on the high end per month, and depending on where they're at from a net worth, size, and complexity. And then you're freed up to do any work possible for them that they need done, as opposed to just investment management. It's like you said, tax planning, investment management.
Exactly.
Looking
And
at
it's
their whole picture.
typically, with the equity compensation piece, is a lot of times things are illiquid too, right? So, there'll be times where somebody has an illiquid position in their private stock, of 500,000, million, whatever it is. And again, you wouldn't necessarily be able to charge on that asset. But people are looking for advice in that realm. And there's things that you can do as far as proactive planning that can really add substantial value down the road. And then once they actually have those investable assets, then it's like very easy for them to, pay that kind of type of fee. So it's still worth it for them in that situation.
Totally. Yeah, the equity comp world is fascinating. And Not my specialty. That is a quick, we're going to find, I'm a heart surgeon. You need a brain surgeon for this one. So we're going to find that. So it's cool that you kind of have a specialty in that world because it is so unique, but it's a rising way that people are getting compensated more and more, especially in like the millennial world. And so, for, I want to ask the question because I really don't know the answer, but you started your business in 2018. Well, you're 2 years into your business and the entire world shuts down because of the COVID pandemic. I started my business in 2021 when everyone's kind of emerging from the pandemic. And I know that COVID obviously hit everybody in different ways. And some people really thrived in it because, access to virtual meetings, things like that. Some really struggled. Where was your business at that time and how did that impact you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, I was not too scared because, like I said, when I first took that initial leap, I did have a runway regardless of economic environment. So I kind of had an 18-month runway. Again,
Mm,
very low personal fixed expenses. So anything could have happened and I would have been good for that runway. And then with every client that I brought on, that increased my runway. Now, my first year in business, I think I made like $15,000 in total revenue, full disclosure. So, it was a slow and steady build up. COVID really didn't impact me too negatively because it actually, if you remember, there was some crazy, stock situations in particular, like Peloton jumps to mind, where I got, a few clients to that situation where, again, it was a year after they went public and their stock just went absolutely crazy. If you remember Peloton stock, it
mhm.
literally looked like the Peloton bicycle ride of what happened to it. So it was an interesting case study and kind of like concentration, diversification. It was just a crazy stock market environment in general. With the stimulus that happened and things like that. So there was a lot of opportunities for actually new client acquisition. I can understand that. I'm sure, and I know a lot of businesses, certain types of industries were impacted very badly. But when you're running a virtual, financial planning, wealth management practice, I wouldn't be a negative at all in that case. So I wouldn't say it was a net negative or net positive. It was just kind of more opportunities to serve people. There's always going to be different economic environments that are going to cause people to need help with their finances. So I
Mm,
think we're kind of lucky in our industry that we can be like recession proof.
yeah. Yeah, I didn't think about that, but you're right. Everybody is always dealing with money. There's not going to be like an economic situation where people aren't dealing with their finances. And so, and in that time, there was a lot of uncertainty, there was a lot of anxiety. And so people were kind of, and the government was giving people stimulus checks. So there was more
Yeah.
cash in people's pockets to be like, I do feel like I can hire on a financial planner. Um, that's cool. It's cool that you had that runway, which not every entrepreneur has. On this podcast, we talked to lots of people who took the jump different ways, whether it's, with a business partner, whether they saved, whether they got a loan or they bought a business. Um, so for you, you chose like, I'm just going to save up a nest egg of 18 months. Was that, what was that like for you? Was it pretty easy because low cost of living and your income was good? Like, no nonchalant. I'm a financial planner. I knew what I needed to save. So I saved it
Yeah.
and then took the jump. Were you waiting until you had a certain amount saved before you made the jump? Like what did that like transition planning look like for you?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and I did a kind of financial planning no-no, which I think will be interesting to talk about. But I, again, was lucky to not have student loan debt. I did have education savings, so that wasn't a burden on me, which is a huge advantage. I think that some people don't necessarily have. I've always been good at living below my means. Again, I had a pretty independent upbringing, so I had a unique kind of, I guess, advantage in that regard. I was like living, I lived in some unique situations after college. Like I rented a room up from this lady off of Craigslist for like $400 a month. Like I was pretty aggressive and looking for different ways to like substantially live below my means. And so, and I wasn't, again, I didn't spend much. So I knew, and this business doesn't luckily require a ton of overhead until you
Hmm.
start adding new types of technology. So it didn't take much in savings to know that like I had this type of runway. And then I also did take a distribution from my Roth 401k. So I had in
Hot
financial
take.
planning, like you can take distributions, penalty, and tax free for any contributions you've made. So not any gains that you've had, and didn't have like too much in there, but that did give me an extra, at least $10 to $20,000 that I used. And so that was kind of like I would not necessarily advise a client to do that. And that's kind of where I talked about sometimes with like the rules for financial planning versus entrepreneurship are a little different. Like you
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily want to do that, but at the same time, like in life, if you're going for something and you need capital, it's not the worst way to do it. And so that's kind of how I gave myself that initial cushion. And again, I still don't have children at this point, but I don't, I thought about the future and how it would only get more difficult over time. Again, it's been a big learning process, but I just knew that the sooner I took that leap and just kind of threw myself into the fire, the more I'd force myself to learn how to grow a business or fail, basically.
Mm-hmm. I Well, I appreciate the courage that takes, because I do think I was just on the phone with someone, a client of mine who has been really nervous about taking the leap. And, it's been about 2 years now, and they keep renewing their contract with their current employer, even though as like a safety net, but because they have the safety net, they also haven't taken the jump to really go all in on building their business. And there is this place where there's not going to be a great time to do it. There's not going to be a time, like you said, it's most of the time it's only going to get harder for lots of reasons. Life becomes more expensive, you have more kids, you take on more liabilities. Life tends to make itself a little bit more complicated leading all the way up to retirement before it makes itself any more, slow down, simple. It tends to speed up. And so I think that was wise of you, and something that anybody who's self-employed can relate to is like, do I take the jump? When do I take the jump? And to just say, I have to go both feet into the fire sooner rather than later, because it's never going to be easier than it is right now. No matter where I am right now, it's never going to be easier than it is right now. And, the worst case scenario is I fail and I go do something else.
Yeah.
It's like I shoot my shot and I either have this incredible experience and it's a great investment for my life, or it's a flop and I turn around and I go back to what I was doing before. Most of the time we think plan B is I'm going to be destitute, under the bridge, eaten by a lion. And really plan B is you just go back to where you exactly are right now, which isn't that bad.
100p. And I also really didn't like the 9 to 5 type of lifestyle. Like it was
Mm-hmm.
really hard for me. And I'm not saying that a lot of people don't feel that way, but I just truly do not feel like I'm the type of person that can just, kind of be forced to sit at a desk kind of thing. Like I love working, but I just hate feeling like I need to do busy work. Like I felt like there was times in the office where I wanted to move very fast and I would get all my work done. And it's like I'm just sitting there trying to make the time go by.
Mm.
Whereas now, when I sit down at my computer, it's like I have things that I have to get done. I'm going to do 90 minutes of deep work. And if I'm not working, I'm going to walk away from my desk. And I truly feel that I'm getting more work done nowadays in like a 4-hour workday than I would get done in 8 hours in that corporate environment.
Mm.
So that's just one thing for me that it's like, money aside, it's like as long as I can at least cover like a basic living for myself, it's still worth that trade-off. I'm sure there would have been opportunities for me to make more money, but for me to feel like I have control over my day, that I'm working on meaningful work, that I have control over my time, like that to me was very valuable.
That's awesome. I completely agree. I think, and I've never been in the 9 to 5. Even my last job was a little bit more like make your own schedule, but just that ability to, like you said, know, kind of plan my day holistically. Like, what do I need to do from a work standpoint, from a personal standpoint? And okay, I've got this much work to do. I've got this to-do list. I can pound it out quickly or slowly, however I want, but then I'm not trapped just because someone says you have to be at this desk. I can, get stuff done, go out to lunch, go to the gym, come back, get more stuff done. Really provides a lifestyle that I think for, like, I have friends and family who they prefer the structure of a 9 to 5. But I do think if for people who have that entrepreneurial, self-employed itch, the 9 to 5 is hard. It is
Yeah.
hard to have that flexibility. It just feels like, why would I do that? I want to go back to something you said that I think is really profound a few minutes ago. That was the rules of financial planning and the rules of entrepreneurship are not always aligned. Like sometimes you have to do something that is kind of dumb from a financial, like on paper perspective, to actually get the capital you need to make an investment elsewhere. Because I've heard of other financial planners saying like, hey, they even took the 10% penalty out of their 401k.
Right.
Because they were like, hey, if I can really invest this money to keep my business afloat and my business 10x's over that time, or, even like 5x's, the percentage growth to my net worth is actually bigger. Like if I can actually grow my business, if this sustains me to be able to last longer to then grow this business and make it sustainable, yeah, it's a risk, but it's actually, I'm taking 10% and I'm trading it for what could be, 80% down the road. And I just think that's interesting. Even when I'm planning with clients, and I'm sure you're similar, it's like money has the quantitative value, which says, on a spreadsheet, what does like $100 buys you $100 worth of stuff, like a 10% return on $100,000 is $10,000. It's like the numbers. But then money also has a qualitative value, which is how is that actually fueling your life? What are your desired outcomes? What's the life you're trying to achieve? And how do we actually use this money to get you there? And it is funny, like, would I recommend someone take money out of their retirement account? Probably not. But then also, like, the financial planner in me is like, no, why would you do that? But then I also understand, maybe that's the qualitative value. Maybe the qualitative value is higher to create a runway for you to build this business and get the life you want and be able to find significance, security, belonging, all the things we want out of life through this business, as opposed to keeping it and having an extra, however much at retirement. I think that that's really profound, that financial planning rules aren't always like real life or entrepreneurship rules. Would you add anything to that?
No, absolutely. I think, I've had client situations where they've walked away from self-employment activities where they were making like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And in this one particular case, it just didn't align with kind of their values, and they felt it not a great energy surrounding like the type of business it was involved. That it was like a gambling type of business. And, you know, I always want to encourage, people in general, whether they're clients or not, to, not prioritize money over that. And then when that decision is made, you can still look and have an objective look at your resources and go, yeah, this might not be the best decision on paper. But as long as you understand the trade-offs, right? I kind of knew the downside risk of, like, in my situation, for example, I could spend whatever, $20,000 from my 401k. And yeah, it's nice to have extra, after-tax money in your 401k that could be, or tax-free money, whatever, for later in life. But at the same time, the downside risk in the grand scheme of things over your career and your earning potential is really not that much. And so you kind of mentioned as well as like fear setting and really thinking about like the worst case scenarios in these types of situations. And don't be afraid to pivot. And this same client situation, they actually had a rental property that they had to end up selling because they made this career change. But they are happier overall, from what it seems, for making that decision. And in the grand scheme of things, they're still going to have a great earning potential in their career, and they're still going to get back to those financial planning fundamentals. So I don't think it's a bad thing to deviate from the traditional fundamentals that we've been taught or that we believe in, if we understand the downside risks, and with the idea that, hey, we're going to get back to these fundamentals once we get back to, cash flow, positive cash flow, things like that.
I totally agree. I think that's really, really well said. So when you think, so you're 6 years into your business now, what does the next 10 years look like? Do you want to remain solo, virtual? Do you want to bring on a team? Like, how big do we want to make this business? Or, yeah, I guess just what's your
Yeah.
vision now that you're 6 years in? What's your vision for the next 6 to 10?
I've really been in survival mode since I started. Like I said, I think one of the things I've discovered about myself is I do have a little bit of a scarcity mindset. I'm trying to change that a little bit and not be afraid to reinvest and do different things. And so, I'm now looking at adding actually outside help and delegating things. And so I do want to kind of grow to what I believe is my capacity as like the people that I can serve, which probably is like 100 households is the max capacity for me as a solo advisor if I have, full-time help for things like paraplan and admin, stuff like that. So that's really my main focus right now is kind of getting up to that point. I feel like I've done a lot of work to this point to really refine the service offering and who I do my best work for and the value that I can add for people. And so that's still like my main goal. I mean, I'm really happy with my work life flexibility as it is. And if I looked back and where I am today, I would be my prior self would be really happy with where I'm at. And so that's something I've also been challenging myself is just like, hey, really reflecting back on the progress that I have made as opposed to thinking about kind of the ideal of where I think I should be. And then, really being proactive now with writing down like the things that I do want to accomplish and just focusing on like, hey, if these are the things that you want to accomplish tomorrow or this next quarter or this next year, if you accomplish those things, then you should be happy with that because that's what you chose. And you don't want to then again move the goalposts and say, these are the things that the ideal that I think I should be at. So really all I'm focused on is like the short and midterm kind of things that I want to accomplish. I do think that there's like more out there for me. As far as like entrepreneurship and doing different things, like I don't anticipate stopping doing what I'm doing. Like I really do enjoy, personal financial planning, but I do want to look at exploring other entrepreneurial, ideas, maybe something that's a little bit more scalable that doesn't require my one-on-one time. But that's kind of where I see, in 10 years, I would anticipate, I'd be at capacity and I'd probably be working on another project as well. But I'm not somebody who, needs to build a big business and have like a liquidity event. I have a lot of hobbies I like doing. So like, it's not for me. I don't need to be all like building business. I'm cool with, I train Muay Thai, I do yoga. I like hanging out with friends. I like playing a lot of different sports. So that's kind of like where I'm at. And then kids will come in as well. So as I'm sure you can speak to how much time that takes.
Yeah. The kid thing is so wonderful. And like a big, like, oh, wow. Yeah. I haven't slept in months. And, my time, just another one of those things. You start a business, you get married, you have kids. All these things are great responsibilities to take on that provide like so much purpose, and it's so fun and take new levels of capacity. But I believe like you're not given the capacity you need until you need it, if that makes sense. Right. Okay. So in the last, 6 years, really 9 years since you entered the industry, what has surprised you the most about kind of your journey in entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I would say how hard it is. I mean, everybody says that, but I think I was definitely young and which ambitious and a little maybe naive or a little thinking it would be easier than it was in some ways, in the sense that like you think you can just build a business and people are going to start walking in the front door kind of thing. But at the same time, I think you do need that mindset to take the leap of faith. So I've been humbled a lot over this journey as far as like, every time you meet with a prospective client, for example, they don't know your story. They don't know that's why you do things like podcasting and blogs and stuff to try to showcase your expertise. But you have to constantly show your value and demonstrate that to people. And so it's just kind of been a lot of humility and that understanding that this is like a very competitive type of industry. It's hard to build trust with people. Financial advisors, like we've talked about, don't have the best reputation for good reason because of kind of historically the product driven nature of it. And so just having the humility to understand that like every, client that signs on is like a privilege. And, I try not to take that for granted. And it's you're constantly earning their business. And, it's, for me, it's a quarter to quarter basis kind of thing. So, that's been the biggest thing for me, is just, understanding that you have to constantly earn it. And then also just not getting too complacent, focusing on that continual improvement. There kind of have been periods where I've taken my foot off the gas and stuff like that, which is fine. I don't want to be in a constant state of like always trying to grow. And that's why I've worked to get more intentional about like, here's the things I want to accomplish. As long as I do those things, then I'm good. I don't need to overanalyze. So those are the biggest kind of things I've learned so far.
It's awesome. What was the low point for you in the journey?
Yeah, low point, man. There's a lot of low points. I would say like early on, client turnover. Like obviously, anytime you lose a client, it's not fun. Sometimes it's not your fault. Sometimes people just you've helped them and they don't need your ongoing advice anymore. And so I would say just learning to deal, with client turnover, and that it is part of this business. Not everyone's going to be a lifelong client. And also understanding that you're not the right fit for everyone as well. So just, understanding that you can only control what you can control. Whether they choose to work with you or continue working with you is not necessarily something that's in your control. So, low points for me would just be unexpected clients, maybe choosing to go a different way, or prospects that I thought were going to sign on board, not choosing to sign on, or, periods of lulls where I didn't have those inbound prospects. And it's just something that, I've learned to deal with, and also be more consistent in the marketing, as far as like there were times where I got a little sidetracked. For example, last year, I tried taking on an Airbnb project. That was also a family type situation where I was trying to help my dad out with giving him a little bit of a retirement income stream. And it took a lot of my time and some resources as well. And I took my foot off the gas as far as marketing. And so I didn't grow the same way I would have liked to. But again, this is why I've gotten back to kind of just focusing on the things that I want to control.
Totally. So this is a podcast about success, but if you ask somebody to define that word success, you'll get different answers from different people. So for you, how would you define success, and how will you know if or when you've quote unquote arrived at success?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for me personally, success is definitely tied to autonomy a lot. So I like the feeling that I don't necessarily have a boss, having partners more so in financial planning clients. So that's the first thing for me, is autonomy. The second thing is, taking control of your time, which is also autonomy, but more so being able to choose who I work with as well. Mm-hmm. So being able to work with people that I enjoy, spending time with, because it is a relationship type business. Success for me is making progress. So like the ability to make whatever type of progress it is. I think we always compare again to other people. It's very easy. I'm guilty of it myself. It's obviously following a lot of people in my industry. It's easy to see all the great things they're doing, especially in our independent space, where I think it is, some of the best advisors. And so it's easy to compare myself to those people. But if I just compare myself to my former self, as long as I'm making progress, to me, that's success. I would say the ability to not be in a rush is a part of success. So like one of the things that I like to do is, when I'm just walking around, Boston, or I'm going to spend time with friends, I'm not in that kind of rat race where everybody's trying to get to the next spot. It's just kind of enjoying the present a little bit more, because the present is all that we have. So I think the more that you can enjoy the present, with the people that you care about, with yourself, that's a form of success. And then lastly, success would just be not feeling, immense financial pressure. Again, that's a very big thing that's easy to feel, even if you are in a good financial situation. Everybody thinks they need a little bit more. But for me, just recognizing that, again, the progress I've made with my personal finances, that I have the flexibility to weather different storms. If I lost clients, if it was a bad economic environment, to me, that's success. Now that can always change, but I think if you've shown yourself enough track history that you've been able to do that, then you should have confidence that probably isn't going to change.
Awesome. I love it. And I agree with it. Well, TJ, thank you so much for being on the Self-Employment Success Podcast. I've loved this conversation. And I'll probably have to have you back. We'll have to do like a expert, like talking about financial planning itself more than your story. But thank you for sharing your story with us, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on.